All right, now we are recording. Thank you for that reminder. So basically we have all that we've covered is we have the app that we built the other day where we can write stuff and see it. But on the load, it goes and fetches all of those posts. Now, the way we've gotten our posts to come so slowly is by writing a little function here to make a slow request. That's all. So what it does is it's going to return this new promise that's a function that has resolve and reject. And after we've waited 5 seconds, let's say, it's going to resolve. And so I just slid that in on line 25. This is just to replicate this request being really slow. And what I want you to do in your breakout groups is I want, and you can fork this over, right? And then install it if you don't have the same code as me. What I want you to do is add a loading slice to this app and update it while fetch all posts is happening. Okay, so we're going to add a loading slice to this app and update it while fetch posts is all is happening. And we want it to show the words loading or a spinner if you're really fast in our posts component. Okay, so when the user refreshes, it should say loading here underneath this area in the screen. You can see my mouse, right? Moving. Oh, okay, cool. I wasn't sure. And then once those things come up, loading will go away and we'll see all those posts. And you're welcome to either do it by using this function as your foundation here. You know, if you want to start dispatching actions potentially inside of that, or you're welcome to use our create async thunk and its promise rejected pending fulfilled API to help you. Okay, so if you don't completely know what I mean, you know, you're welcome to look those things up and we'll go over it again together as well. But start off with your loading slice and having that display during loading. Any questions on that? None? Or okay. So I will, and I'm going to push the code so that you have our super slow code there. Slow code. Okay, so it's all pushed, so you're welcome to pull. I'm going to put us in breakout rooms. We're going to put, we'll have about, what's been our classes, actually, real quick, before breakout rooms, in this poll, it's not a scale of 1 to 5. I want to know what your ideal number per breakout room. One would be that you'd really rather just work by yourself. 5 is a 5-person group, 4-person group. All right, cool. So we're gonna aim for 4-person groups based off of that poll. There are some 5 individuals, but sorry, you're outnumbered. Better luck next time. All right, so let's do this breakout room. Okay, this should have 4 to 5 participants. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, right? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. All right, well, there's a few rooms with 3. Sorry. And there's mostly rooms with 4. Okay. Let's give ourselves 25 minutes to do this. Okay. See you all soon.
You just got hung up on that portion.
Okay. So that's where you got hung up. What about the other groups?
Let me stop sharing my screen.
Where else did we get hung up on? Come on, don't be shy. How am I supposed to help you if you don't tell me what you need help with?
We try to use extra reducers.
Okay.
And we knew it takes, like loading was one of the things it could take based off of a function, but we didn't know what else it could take. So we got caught up like Googling that.
Okay. You got caught up Googling the extra reducers.
Yeah. And then we found like extra reducer mapping or something. We couldn't find what we were looking for.
Okay. Makes sense. What else? Let's hear from another group.
Hey, Corey, question.
Yeah.
What if I set that initial state to like a Boolean? Would that have worked?
I think that would have been a better idea.
Okay. All right. That probably
Yeah.
would have worked. Yeah. Okay. Because that way it would be that, it will start off as true, it will load, and then when it clears, it will set to false. And then
You might even want it to start off as false.
it's Henry's idea. Sorry. He just asked, could he get a shout out? It was Henry. He just DM'd me. He was just like, yo, what if y'all set it to a Boolean? And it actually made a ton of sense. I wanted to ask it.
Okay. Good shout out to Henry.
Shout out to Henry, 1000%.
David, you said setting up reducers. What do you mean by that?
Like we were like him. We went through, spent a lot of time trying to figure out the reducers. Where we did eventually go with the true false idea. And by the time we did, didn't have time to finish the setup.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Any other groups want to share where they got hung up?
We got stuck on I was with Nilbert and Ashia. We started off with the Boolean, but we got stuck trying to figure out the reducers after, because I guess wouldn't necessarily have a payload, but yeah, that's where we got stuck.
Okay. I hear ya. All right. Let's try it. Let's talk about it. Okay, so let's do it both ways. I don't really know how everybody did it yet, but let's start off with the way we're most familiar with. So instead of using this create async thunk, we'll just write code that looks more like what we used to write, and is still totally valid to write. I'm just going to add our slow code line in here as well. Okay. I don't know why I did that wraparound. Sorry. I do not like that. I guess it's because it's over that line. Oh well. Okay. So just to make sure it's still working the way we're expecting it to, I'm going to refresh this page. And it takes a while for the code. Okay, great. And I'm going to go ahead and put that on the right side. Okay, So the first thing we should be thinking about is creating another slice, right? So slices are what is a designated section of our application state. So in order to do that, let's start in our features folder here. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call this loading. And inside of our loading, I'm going to create a file called loading slice. Right, so if I'm going to create a slice, I'm going to be using my Redux Toolkit create slice. So that seems straightforward enough. So let's go ahead and do create slice. And we're going to go ahead and get that from @Redux Toolkit. And we go, great. Let's go ahead and make this slice. So we'll say export const, and we'll call this loading slice. Maybe I'll capitalize it. I want to be consistent to whatever I was doing before, which was not capitalizing, so I'm not going to. And that's going to be create slice, takes in an object, and then it has a few required keys. So it has a name, which I'm going to call loading. It has an initial state. And this is something, we saw in Henry's group, not Henry's group, Marvin's group, they did the empty string. Loading for me seems really like a binary like situation. We're either loading or not loading. So in situations where things are either this or that, and it's like this binary, I think a better approach would be to use a Boolean. So I'm going to initialize my state to be false. And then we also have this reducers key. And this is where I can set certain actions. So let's pretend maybe I just want to toggle loading, right? Because I want to turn it on or turn it off. Maybe there's a chance I could get in trouble doing this because something could toggle and I don't actually have control of is loading or is not loading. But for now, I'm not so concerned. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a toggle loading. This is a key. And this is going to take in my state, which I'm really not going to use. Actually, I am going to use it. Sorry. State. And I don't need a payload. But instead, I can just go ahead and return not state. So when it's true, this will become false. And when this is false, our new state will become true. And I go, okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and export those things. So we go export const toggle loading. And that's going to be our loading slice dot actions. And we'll also export default our loading slice dot reducer. Now I've created a new reducer. So if I want to use that reducer, what do I have to do? Write it in the chat. What do I have to do now that I've created a new slice and reducer? Okay, we got a few guesses here. We got Sin, thank you. Crystal, yeah, nice. Nilbur, Jay, Karen, thank you for writing. Danny, Danny says bodega. Deja says change in la tienda. Oh, I like all these words. Bien. Ja, as they say. Okay. Yeah. So we're right. We want to change or update our configure store. So we're going to go into that. So that's over here in our app. And let's go ahead and pull in our loading slice. So we'll say import loading reducer from /features/loading/loading slice. And I can just go ahead and make my new pairing, right? So I can say loading and loading reducer. Oh, this one's a trailing comma maybe. And that's pretty cool. Like, I don't need to add it to combine reducers or anything. I can just go ahead and do it straight here in my configure store, which combines all the reducers for me and makes the store. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so now I've got this loading slice of state. And so, you know, I'm going to access that slice of state somewhere. So I talked about my post index and how on the refresh, we want to be able to see this word loading. So if it's loading, I'll just show that word, right? I could make a whole component or something, but I think that's a little overkill for right now. Instead, I can use my U selector and just go ahead and pull out my loading state. So I'm going to say const is loading. And I'm going to say that I'm going to get that from our U selector. And I could do our function here where I say state and return state dot loading. I could go ahead and do that. Or I could also do one more thing that we learned the other day, which was that I could export something like that. I could say export select loading and assign that to a function that returns state dot loading. Why would I do that? It just seems a little bit cleaner to me. This should be const. And so here, I can then import that instead. So I can say select loading. I go, okay, great. So now if I'm loading, so if is loading, I want to return something a little bit different, right? I don't want to return all my posts because I don't have them. So instead, I can just return like a div, let's say, with the word loading. Or this is where I would put some kind of spinner or something. But for now, just it is loading. So I don't think we'll be able to see anything yet because it's not actually, we're not actually calling the load anywhere. I'm going to update the slow code so that it's not 5 seconds, but 3 seconds. 5 just feels like overkill to me. And in our loading slice, I'm going to initialize this as true just so we can see that we actually see it loading in the event that it's loading. So, and we see, oh, okay, we do see this loading. But however, it will never come because we're not actually ever turning it off. So this really should start as false. But we see that it will work if the state is indeed true. So where do we add it? Right, we've got a couple options. First option we spoke about was in here. This fetch posts where we have a function that returns a function that takes in dispatch as its argument. So that way we can directly dispatch actions. So for me to do something like that, I'd have to import toggle loading. Toggle loading. And I would go ahead and do that from our loading and loading slice. So if I do that, I can go ahead and dispatch. So whenever this function's called, I can go ahead and dispatch our toggle loading and invoke that function. And then whenever we actually get our posts, I'm going to go ahead and dispatch that function again. So this one will turn our loading on. And once we get all of our posts back, we'll turn our loading off. Now, in the event that for some reason there's an error, I think it's okay to also turn our loading off then as well, because we don't want it to forever say loading for the user. We want to let them know it didn't work. All right? There's nothing worse than watching a website that says loading, and then a half hour later you go, I think it's not coming. You know, it would be better to turn it off and say, hey, didn't come. Okay, so with these adjustments, let's check our code. So we refresh, and it says loading. And then we get our posts. And we go, okay, that's it. That's everything. So any questions on this implementation?
Wait, so toggle loading is just the name of the action that you created in the loading slice, right?
That's correct, Marvin. So I created this loading slice with this toggle loading, and all it does is
Just
flip the state.
Okay. That cool. That makes a lot of sense.
And so then in our posts index, I'm accessing that section of our state, and I'm checking, and if it is loading, I'm going to show it. And in our fetch all posts, I'm going to actually go ahead and dispatch that before I make the call, and then again after I get a response back, whether it's positive or negative.
Okay.
And I can prove that as well by like taking out that C. Now we will have a crap call, and eventually, oh, interesting. Well, we break the app eventually because we don't have we're not actually handling the errors anyway. But if we were handling the errors, besides just continuing to throw the error, like instead of dispatching that, I would dispatch my receive errors, and then I should turn off. Let's try. And it's off. Now nothing's here, but we see it's finished loading. All right, for this example, I'm going to remove the throw error. Any other questions on how we did that? So let's try the other approach. So I'm going to go back to commenting out this code. I'm also going to comment out our toggle loading. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I am going to import my fetch all posts. So I'm going to bring back our fetch all post where we're using create async thunk, right? This takes in a string with the action type there. So this is from the post slice, and this is what's happening. And this is going to, and the second argument is a function, which is going to return a promise. Let me fix that before I forget to. Okay. Which is going to return a promise, which is just going to have the data. Now, create async thunk, like there's no place for us in here to dispatch, right? I can't just dispatch toggle loading in here because dispatch is not defined. I don't have dispatch. So, but that's okay. So I can't do that. But instead, I'm going to rely on create async thunk, which is going to give me back this function with 3 different states. So I'm going to have a loading, pending for a promise is pending, fulfilled for the promise is fulfilled, and lastly, rejected for the promise has been rejected. So I'm going to import fetch all posts into my loading slice. So that goes like this: import fetch all posts. Oops. And I'm actually going to take that from /posts/post slice. So now I have access to this function. And so the reason I'm commented out my toggle in my post slice, let me move that over here, is because if this file is importing from that file and that file is importing from this file, you can end up in a circular dependency problem where they can't both import from each other at the exact same time. One file has to load before the other. So a way around that would be to extrapolate some code into a third file that imports both of them. And I just didn't want to have to do that. But that's why I'm commenting out our toggle load, because I don't want this to be importing that while loading is importing from this file. It's called a circular dependency.
Yeah, but you have the same line on line 4.
I have the same line. Oh, it just showed up. Thank you. That was an auto make from when I was showing the dispatch. That wouldn't work in here. Thank you, Ishia. Very good catch. That will cause the issue. All right, so how do I actually use this fetch slice? Can I do this? Fetch all posts? No, I cannot. This action, so be it, is coming from somewhere else, someone else's reducer from a different slice. So I'm going to use the key extra reducers. An extra reducer is an object, and in here I can go ahead and say those actions. Now I can't just say fetch all posts like this, because this creates like a solidified key and doesn't look at fetch all posts as a variable that's being passed in. So instead, I have to wrap this in square brackets. Now, I get a function that says state and action if I want. And I can do something. So this state here actually refers to my loading slice of state. Now, I don't feel comfortable just toggling necessarily, because I don't know the state of the promise necessarily where it gets toggled. I guess I could, but I'd rather change it up a little bit. So for fetch all posts, I can go ahead and specify. So hey, when we're pending, I'm not even going to worry about state, and I'm just going to return true because it's loading. We have a pending promise. And hey, fetch all posts, when it's fulfilled, I'm going to return false because I no longer want to be loading. And hey, if I'm rejected, if this promise is rejected, I'm just going to go ahead and return false as well, because this promise is also no longer loading. So if I do this, we should also see our code still work. And it should look a little bit like magic. Loading, and it works. Right, so that is the other way for us to do this, using our create async, which is going to return this promise. And we can bring in that action and look at that action's different promise states and update our current slice's state accordingly. Yeah, Henry, this way is a little bit smoother. This way is a little bit newer, so there's definitely not quite as much literature on it. The other way is definitely still used a lot. Like I said, create async thunk, I think literally came out like mid-March of this year. So this is like hot off the press. So there's still way more things out there that look like our first way. And the thing is, it does have to return this promise. So like if I was using set timeout traditionally, right? So if I look at our counter example and I look at our counter slice, we have this increment by add async, right? Where it takes this second. Now that's happening down here. They're not using create async thunk, but that's because their asynchronous action isn't returning a promise at all. The set timeout doesn't return a promise. Set timeout returns a number that you can make it so you can clear the timeout. And so if you're doing something like that, it's much easier to use this way, where you can just dispatch anywhere you want inside. So, there's benefits to both. And, I really super duper encourage you to play around with both and try to get comfortable and find, what works for you. And and all of that, because there's a lot of different styles in programming. Any questions? Okay. So quick poll, how do you feel about this, and could you implement this now on your own? 5 being yes. 1 being like absolutely not, impossible.
So Corey, so every single time you get a reducer from another piece of slice, it has to go under extra reducers, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Great question. Every time you are pulling out a reducer from a different slice, it goes in an extra reducer if you're using it in that slice. Okay, so I'm gonna end.
So sorry, quick question.
Sure.
So, is there another example of why we would need to use another reducer in that, like another piece of slice?
That's like, you mean like another real life use case?
Yeah, like why would, like, is that something that we would, like, for this case this makes sense, but like any other reason?
Nothing that comes to the top of my head, but I'm sure that I don't know. Does anybody else have any ideas of when you might want one reducer to listen for another one? So
Like if they're linked in some way, like the higher farmer and the fruits example you gave us.
yeah, right. Maybe they're just linked. They're just somehow linked for some reason. Like there's a special feature in a game, maybe like you're building a game logic, and when somebody clicks on the nose, the left ear needs to fall off and the lips need to fall off, like you're beating someone up with a mouse click for whatever reason. And like if you click on the nose 6 times, the left ear falls, and if you click 10 times, the mouth falls. So those would both need to listen for the nose click, right? So that's kind of a brutal example, but it's not unimaginable. Thank you, Maria, for helping with the remind you about the farmer.
We need it.
Maybe like if you buy like an apple and the state of your cart listens for that and the inventory listens for that as well.
Yeah, that's a good example too, Doug, right? That cart and inventory are both listening for that apple, for sure.
I like that.
And maybe even more, maybe with the market, the
Or maybe
advertising.
bananas.
What'd you say?
Maybe bananas.
Yeah, maybe banana. You know, I got within a bush. Like I ate them all except for 1 bushel, I think, which I still have, but they're starting to look pretty bad. And I got a new shipment with 2 bushels in. So we're in 3s and 4s. You know, the question was, can you do this on your own? It's gonna all be a 5 because it has to be. It may not be yet, and that's okay. For you 2s out there, you know, hit us up. Hit me, Jenny, and John up. We will help you. For the 3s, also, you can everybody can hit us up. But, you know, if you're feeling less than you can, like, definitely hit us up. If you're feeling like shaky, just practice like crazy. Okay? Good. That's the end of the lecture. I'll be around to answer questions. Otherwise, I'll see you all later. As you sign out, write something in the chat that you learned and that you want to remember.